Hello, Jess.
Hi, Genevieve.
Thanks so much for joining me for this talk for the East Suffolk Business Festival, where we're going to talk about events and also your own career in the events industry. So I hope that's okay.
Go for it.
Jolly good. So first of all, could you just tell me a bit about how you got into creating events?
Yeah, of course. I don't think I probably came at it your traditional route, really. So I actually trained as a dancer. So that was my career path, and worked as a dancer for many years. But it's quite an unpredictable career. So you have lots of downtime. So when I wasn't working, I would work in events. And that's kind of how it all started. So um, working in London, Madame Two Swords, all different sorts of places that had small events going on. Um, so when I actually stopped dancing was when I started to really get into events and realized that actually lots of the things I'd learned from my dance background were very important for events. So attention to detail, putting on a show, lots of things that you don't really kind of think are the same are very similar. So I did a lot of training on the job actually and kind of built my way up that way.
That's really interesting because I suppose quite a lot of people nowadays will study events as a career sort of job choice and do a course, but actually you did it through learning on the ground, and often that's a really good way, I think. So
Yeah, I
could
think so.
yes, could you just tell me a little bit about the different sorts of events that you've created?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that, if people have heard of me in this area, it's about working on a food and drink festival. So that was kind of my big project here. And I was there for 10 years working on the Aldeburgh Food and Drink Festival, which lots of people might have heard about, which is amazing to work on because it's not for profit, which is, it makes such a big difference when you're, as an event, not trying to come out the other end with a profit, because that can be really difficult, especially within festivals and those style of events. But it also means that you have to be quite creative when you're working with smaller budgets. It was a community interest company, so you always had to think about what was the kind of main thing that ties everything together, and it always brings you back to a similar point. So whether that's making sure it's about local people or food or what's happening next, there's always something to kind of bring you back in line. So that's something I've worked on for many years. But before that, I've worked on other festivals. So there was a cocktail festival which I helped set up in London. And before that, it was lots of smaller events. Some of them were outdoor team building, some of them were working for investment banking, setting up their events. So a really stretch of different genres, really.
And what sort of challenges have you faced in doing all those different sorts of events?
That's a really interesting one because there's always different challenges. And I think the thing that I've always found is really important is to keep things moving and to make sure that whatever happens, whether it's going to plan or not going to plan, um, it's making sure that there's always the next step and that you've either thought about that in advance so it runs smoothly. I think the things for events is that there's always 100 things going on at the same time. Whereas when somebody's actually part of that event or within the operations of it, I suppose, they shouldn't know. They shouldn't be able to see where the seams join together. They should be able to just immerse themselves in the experience. So I think learning how to juggle lots of things at once has been something that's really important and helped all the way through.
Have you had any sort of disasters that you've had to deal
Of
with?
course.
Can you tell us a bit?
Yeah, I think there's always disasters, isn't there? I mean, I think something really tiny can be a disaster for you at the time. I don't know if I can think of any one particular thing, but it's always about being creative, isn't it? And I think that that's where things align sometimes with, you know, past careers. It's trying to think outside of the box so that when something that potentially could be disastrous happens, you kind of are able to flip it around to think, well, you know, that was kind of where we were going to go, or that was what was meant to happen. So can't think of one really interesting thing. So I'm sure they're all really boring, but at the time they probably felt like the worst disaster ever.
Sounds like you deal very well with a challenge. I can remember one event I put on where we were flooded um, a few hours before a few, probably 1,000 people were about to arrive. And yes, I remember thinking, this is just, what am I going to do logistically?
Yeah.
But actually, you're right. You just have to go into firefighting mode, don't you? And find another solution. So I suppose that is the key in a way to being confident that you can take on different events. So, would you say that you have a sort of toolkit that you use in your profession?
Yeah, definitely. I think that whether that's starting from the beginning or even your toolkit that you have on the day, you know, lots of it is about the building blocks. So you go back to every event, it starts from an idea, you know, so whether that's a theme, so if it's a party, you know, there might be a theme or an occasion, whether that's a festival, an ethos, there's always something that kind of you need as a starting point, which you then build your blocks onto. Um, and I think a big thing about events is you want people to experience something, you want them to feel something. So whether that's a celebratory feel or an excitement or just this kind of tingle of positivity that you can't necessarily say what it is, but it's something. I think events can be really emotive. So your tools that you bring in for those create that. So whether that's music or food or a visual or a location. So I think it's definitely about the building blocks that you kind of move around. And the same thing on the day. You know, I definitely have an event toolbox of all the boring things you need, double-sided sticky tape and masking tape. You know, if you can't fix it with masking tape, you might as well give up.
I can agree more, really. And do you think, when I sort of talk about toolkit, do you think that there are some kind of key planning tools that you use when you're thinking about putting on an event?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm probably quite old school in the way that I do things. I like to do it all, you know, a spreadsheet and a time frame and a timeline. Whereas there are definitely lots of pre-made tools that people can use, you know, to plan an event. There is a step by step of have you thought of this, have you done that? And obviously every event is completely different. Um, but I normally break everything down to timings, people, um, those experiences, those highlights, locations, anything that might limit you. I like to look at to see what's our limitation. Can we stretch it? You know, what gives you the boundaries? So that might be a budget or it might be a capacity. And then trying to work around those and using those to be creative. And I think that within events, you have to have kind of two sides. You have to have a creative vision, and then you have to have a very practical vision. And I think a lot of the time, events can be put out as if it's a very sort of glamorous way of life. You know, there's lots of parties and wonderful things to do, but there's lots of practicalities to that. And a methodical approach, I think, is always good. And for me, it's about putting those things into a spreadsheet, you know, looking at that time, is anything crossing over? Is, you know, do I need to change or adjust anything? And once it's all written down, you can start to really plan that out. And, you know, the timeline does the same thing for me.
Yes, I'm on the same page as well. Well, we're talking today as part of the East Suffolk Business Festival. So I wondered what you think the benefits of events are specifically to businesses.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. I think for businesses, it gives you another opportunity. It gives you a chance to either reach potentially another customer base or to trial something, pilot other things. The good thing with events is they don't have to happen again and again. so you can pick a theme. So if you were a restaurant, you can do something completely different to something you would normally do. If you're a shop, you can have a special day, or if you're a business, you can have a one-off opportunity. But it means that you can potentially reach a whole other customer base, but you can pilot that within an event. So it just gives you an opportunity to go outside your normal day-to-day business operations, and I think and obviously that's completely different depending on what business you are, and what event you decide to do. There's also that side that it gives the people that work within that business a different opportunity, potentially to use a different kind of skill set, or to be more creative than they might normally be. But I think a lot of it is about reaching new people. How do you, somebody that is interested in your business for one reason might not be interested in it for the same reason as somebody else, and it gives you the chance to kind of reach all of those bases and explore what else is out there.
I think that's really interesting. And I suppose there's also something about how you market the event when you're a business as well. Do you get involved with that?
Yeah, I think marketing's really important, and something so simple as the title that you give your event can make such a big difference to the way that somebody views it. But a lot of that can be around, lots of events are based around a target market, so that you're looking at a particular section of people that you want to engage with. And with social media and the way that websites work these days, it's such an amazing tool, because you can start looking at who's interacting. So who looked at that post? Was it a visual post? Was it a picture? Was it something that kind of described what was going to happen? And you can start really breaking down to see who's engaging with you as a business. And you can also use that in a way to target people that aren't engaging with you. So why isn't a certain demographic engaging with your business, and potentially an event might be able to reach out to that demographic? So I think it's really powerful, and events don't have to be huge events. They can be small things as well, and they're so scalable that I think within many business sectors they can work. So quite often people don't necessarily think events is something that they could venture into, but it can kind of work in many different areas.
Yes, and following on from that, I mean, would you have any particular suggestions or thoughts for SMEs, perhaps, for them to think about, the scale? Could they afford it? Is it worthwhile? Just a few ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think that everything's scalable. So I would definitely say, if you haven't, dipped into events before, to start off small. You don't need to have a huge event. It doesn't need to be a festival, or it doesn't need to be even a whole day event. You can do small activities that just test the water. I guess unless you're sort of giving an example, it's quite difficult to think about how that works for each business. But if you were just thinking in a retail idea, a shop, for example, if they wanted to start thinking about whether events work for them, that could be something quite simple as holding a masterclass, or having a guest. So there's lots of examples of amazing bookshops that hold small events, and they don't have to be a whole day, and it might be one author, but it's a different way to engage. It's a different atmosphere. There's another level of excitement, and I think it just really starts to build the layers of businesses. And another one, that is great for social accounts, and keeping people engaged and active within what you're doing.
Yes, absolutely. And what about how businesses would approach planning in terms of their own personnel? I mean, are any tips from you about what you kind of need to look for in your own team to think who could help put the event on?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I would say create a team, a small team. Sometimes within events, it can be quite difficult when you've got large groups of people because everybody's got different ideas, and we all kind of go in different directions. So I'd say have a core team, make sure you've got someone in there that's happy to do all the kind of nuts and bolts of things, because you definitely need to keep track of what's happening and when, and have a good schedule. And also that person that's happy to follow up all the people that said they'd do something. That's a big thing, especially if it's extra to their normal workload. And also don't be too ambitious to start with, which I feel like that's kind of, you don't necessarily want to hear that. You want somebody to say, yeah, get out there and have a crazy event. But I think it can really put people off. So lots of people have grand ideas, I think, to start with. And there's quite a lot of detail to putting events together. And if it's additional to other people's workloads already, I think to go too big can just kind of crush everybody at the beginning. So start small, have a core team, have a creative, but don't let the creative get too wild, because, that could be your budget or the ideas. You definitely need someone there as well that's kind of keeping everybody grounded and thinking about the small details, and the practicalities.
I think that's all very useful advice. I think it's that sort of do something well, limit it a bit, isn't it? And I really agree with that. Um, I think one of the things about events that we all appreciate, even those of us who sort of put them on and produce all sorts of different events, as they're called, um, is that kind of bringing together of people and the opportunity, almost like the sort of byproduct of the event is that there's this great opportunity for people to connect. There might be the extra kind of benefit that comes from meeting physically, um, enjoying what the event's about, but that it might kind of spawn more business or other ideas. But of course, we've had this really interesting period of the pandemic, and I wondered what you think that's going to do to events, how that's going to affect how events are put on and approached.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, actually. It'll be interesting to see what does happen, because I think initially there's a feeling that there's going to be an event happening all the time, and that there's going to be this crazy amount of events that people can't keep up with. But I think that from what I can work out, lots of the smaller events, lots of local things have kind of gone on the back burner, because lots of those people are volunteers. They haven't happened for a few years. Groups kind of start to break down. So I think it will gradually grow. And I think people will be cautious. I think that we got to a point where there was, especially within Suffolk, there was something happening every weekend. There was a food festival here and a craft market there, and you could almost find something whenever you wanted to. But I do think that will have scaled back a little, and it will take a bit of time for it all to, for people to find their feet. I think it's been a difficult time for the events industry, and I think a lot of people will come back quite nervously. And I think if you've been able to weather the storm, that's amazing. And I think that it's taken a lot of work behind the scenes for people to be able to do that. So the other side of it is that I think people are really appreciative. So I think that the customers coming to events appreciate those events a little bit more. And coming from a background where I did work through the pandemic and we did put some events on, it was really different, and it was something that we, nobody had ever had to deal with before. And the things that you had to think about, and the kind of the projections that you had to try and make, it was so challenging that things were constantly changing, like it was for everybody, really. That was really difficult for the events industry. And I think that it was almost just shut down, and that was quite an alarm, I think, for people that had got so used to working, all these people that work within events, they kind of work all over the place, and they move from one place to another, and they dedicate a period of time, and then they're off and they're doing something else. And that was such a lifestyle change. So I think it will be interesting to see where it gets to, and you hope that it will build to a good level again, and that I think there is the call, I think people want to get out and they want to enjoy themselves, but they also really want to make sure that they're selective and that they feel safe in the environment, and probably that are being considered. That the visitor experience is really considered, whether that's a small one or a big event. That people have really thought about how that impacts their visitor and the experience that they get when they're there.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. And I think probably from a business perspective as well, that idea of considering what everybody's doing, taking a step back, looking carefully at an event and how it can benefit business is something that will happen as well, because we've all had to think about these things so carefully, but also really appreciating, like you said, the benefit that it brings, that sort of face to face experience that people have missed so much. So I think it will be a very interesting period for the events industry. But as you say, I imagine too that it will come back to a really good level and hopefully, before too long.
I think the other thing within all of that as well is that it's really important, again, for people to meet people face to face. Within business, something you picked up on there is that events are a really good way for people to come out and meet people, and an opportunity for businesses that maybe aren't always customer facing to put something together to either appreciate customers, to meet them, to put a face to an email or somebody on the end of the phone. And I think within small communities, that's really important, and people still do really value that. So I think that's a great reason for businesses to put on events as well.
Jess, can I ask you specifically about the Marketplace project that you're currently managing across East Suffolk?
Of course, yeah. So the Marketplace project is part of a project which has been funded by the Welcome Back Fund. So it's really all about celebrating market towns. And obviously, because of the COVID pandemic and the way that, the high street has been impacted, the idea of these events is to celebrate those towns, to give people a reason to go back into the towns, and also to celebrate the shops, the people that own the shops, the people that work within it, to make them have a celebratory event, for what they do, what they're part of. So it's been a really interesting project, actually. There's been a lot more elements to it than I think we originally thought when we first started.
Yes, and I suppose it's got a sort of placemaking theme to it as well, which I always think is a very important aspect of events, how events can bring a place alive. Do you agree with that?
Definitely. So all of these places are different. So there's lots of similarities, but they're all very unique. And it's been really interesting because we're trying to work alongside, whether that's the events team that are kind of set up within the town that run some of their events. Lots of those people volunteer their times, or whether that's the town council. So there's lots of different parties, business groups, and everybody's got their view on their town and what they think their town needs, or who they think the town is. So it's been really interesting to try and weave those into the events. And lots of those things are the things we talked about, finding that real core that kind of runs through the middle of the event, which makes it unique and different, and gives it that real atmosphere that people kind of celebrate and feel like they want to be part of.
Yes, absolutely. And I suppose it also, an event can make local people see their own town anew. Even the sort of geography of it as well can be changed by an event, can't it?
Yeah, definitely. And parts of these events are piloting markets, and lots of these places are market towns, but they don't actually have markets anymore. And I think within the different generations, everybody sees that town slightly differently. So you've got a young generation and an older generation, and their view of what a market town should be or could be is all very different. So I think that's what's been nice, is to look and reflect some of those different ideas. And it doesn't have to be a one kind of fit for everybody. These places can have lots of different aspects and elements to make everybody feel part of that town and like they want to be part of it.
Thank you very much, Jess. It's been really interesting speaking to you. And I hope people have enjoyed this conversation as part of the East Suffolk Business Festival. I think that's the end of our conversation now. But I look forward to working with you on some good events in the near future. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Genevieve.